Hi everyone, and welcome to the first Content Melbourne live Q&A, brought to you by Team Content. We've never done this before, so hopefully it goes off without a hitch. But behind the scenes, we've got all the team, Gemma Bauman, Julia Fernandez, and Justin Meneguzzi. They're going to be collecting comments as we go, so make sure you fill the YouTube feed with questions. I'll try and get to them as we go through, but if I don't, we'll come back around and do it at the end. Let me introduce our guest speaker for today. Andres Lopez-Varela is Head of Strategy at Storyation and a seasoned armchair traveller. Welcome, Andres.
Hello, how are you, Mark? Thanks for having me on this very first inaugural auspicious live Q&A.
No worries. Well, we're going to get straight into it. We're going to do 20 minutes of questions from the team. And as I said, we'll pepper through questions as we go. But let us know how it's going. If there's any technical problems, make sure you let us know in the comments and the team will feed that back through to me. Let's start off, Andres, with travel. Okay, so we are in the grips of a lockdown. Many of our airlines have sort of stopped flying, both domestically and internationally. Qantas in a bit of trouble. Virgin looking for a bailout. Is travel dead for the foreseeable future?
It's sad. I mean, travel's not dead, certainly. I mean, I guess you would want to make the distinction between tourism and travel. Tourism certainly is maybe not dead, but it's taking a rest, it's taking a break. And travel as a concept, if you like, is still alive and well. And I like to differentiate the two by talking about the brand of travel. And the brand of travel is just this idea, this concept, what travel actually means to us as people, as human beings. And, you know, tourism is the industry that's around it. Tourism are all the businesses that are around it. They're all the kind of, you know, palaver that goes around that, the things you just mentioned there, airlines, hotels, tours, Airbnb, and everything. And that certainly has come to a necessary pause. And in fact, coming out the other side of this, it's not going to be the same as it was going into it.
Yep.
But travel itself remains. Travel remains. Travel is a big privilege. Travel is a very positive experience. The concept of travel, the aspiration to travel as such, is really valuable, and it's something certainly that brands in this space, travel brands, tourism operators, you know, whether they're big or small businesses, really need to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of, because the brand of travel is what we're about, and it's the reason why people kind of give a crap about travel. And about travel brands, and so that's really what we need to be conscious of, sort of keeping the torch on for.
And is that like saying, the restaurant industry going through some hard times, hospitality in general, but it doesn't mean that we don't love food anymore, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue spending our energy promoting the idea of food next to our brands, which might be restaurants, which might be food outlets. If we don't get people loving food and keep feeding that impulse, then we're not going to have anything at the end.
Correct. We're not going to have anything at the end, but also we're not going to have anything right now to kind of help us through this time. And I think that's one of the key things that really maybe people are missing, or not missing, but certainly that might seem kind of hard to kind of grasp for marketers and content creators, is that ability to actually use this time to speak about those higher order messages that don't speak to something practical, like commercially kind of viable right now. They're not sort of commercial or transactional messages, but they exist sort of on a different level. And so I think the key there, your analogy of food is perfect. I mean, we're all sort of cooking more. Everyone's discovered sourdough bread baking and weekend cake baking. And, someone the other day was telling me that they made their first 3D cake ever, of a dog, which was apparently not the easiest one to choose for your first time. So don't try that. But the reality is that those actual pursuits around that are like the pursuits around travel. People are still planning. People are still, talking about their trips. People are still sort of, keeping in mind what that next step is, the next stage is. And right now, it's really important for travel brands to do two things. And the first one is to stop the offers, like stop being price driven, stop trying to sell us stuff and say book up until the end of July 2021 or whatever.
Yep.
And be more visionary, like look at the conversation around travel or traveling in 6, 12, 24 months time. A lot of these businesses are always, and rightly concerned with turning a profit every quarter. But the reality is that right now it's not possible. And if that's the only focus in any kind of conversation you're having, it's not going to end well for you. And it's certainly not going to deliver any value for your audience because they can't action that stuff. Now, you will have die-hard loyalists. Cruising bookings are up for the 2021 season in some kind of strange twist of events, some kind of Machiavellian Black Mirror sort of moment. But aside from that, it's important for us to look at the longer term and give people content and conversations and communication that says, it's all right to want to travel in 24 months' time and be planning for then, and sort of help them facilitate that and add value that way rather than trying to, toss a $999, 10-day whatever at them now. Because even though obviously they can't travel now, that just reminds them that you as a brand are desperate. And frankly, so are they. And that's not what travel should be associated with. So we really need to yank the brakes on that pretty hard. Otherwise, the reason for travel, and like I said, the brand of travel, is kind of lost to a certain extent.
And do you think, I imagine that some people are sort of thinking, well, as we're coming out of the more extreme sort of recommendations around isolation, that there is this pent-up demand. And if we don't put out offers now, if we don't, keep that sort of that offer stream bubbling, then we're going to sort of miss out on that dam as it bursts. Do you think that is like a viable strategy? Do you think that there is pent-up demand?
There's kind of two schools of thought, I guess, in the travel industry, in tourism industry at the moment. And one of those is that, yes, there is pent-up demand. And I have seen some studies in particular from, I think, the US and the UK showing that people are just, champing at the bit to get out there and travel. But there's one, that certainly misses, one big thing is that people always answer these surveys about their aspiration to travel, mostly with yeses. Like if you say to people, are you intending to travel in the next 12 months? Of course I am, absolutely. In the next 6 months, I would love to, yes. But then going from aspiration to actual booking, the drop-off is enormous. And so there's actually no real hard data, except in cruising, to show that there is actually a pent-up demand. And so the other school of thought is that everything has changed so dramatically, the nature of travel will change, travel will still remain, but the reasons why we travel, how we travel, the things that matter to us when we travel are all going to change a lot. And also, at the same time, the reality of people's life situations are going to change because they're going to come out of this potentially with some with mental health or anxiety, considerations. They're going to come out of this maybe without a job or with a greatly reduced income. They're going to come out of this having to sort of rearrange their life plans because effectively this whole year will, be put on hold in some way, shape or form. So all that information, all that data is missing, and there is no evidence for pent-up demand. And I get very, very narky at people who say there is a pent-up demand because it is a naive point of view. And so our communications, our content needs to think about rebuilding. This is much like the situation that you see with tourism recovery stories in the past following, wartime, where, particularly in World War II in Europe, there were a lot of places that the actual attractions were decimated. And so it's not like you could say, hey, people want to come to Greece, people want to come to Italy. Well, sure, they might. But then actually when they go to look and to book, there's no hotels, there's no flights, there's no actual things to go and see and do. And that really changes the nature and the complexion of travel and what it's going to look like. And that's the reason why I say we need to be thinking longer term, and we need to be planning for many different considerations, opportunities, situations that are happening over a number of years, rather than expecting that as soon as people can travel, say, between Australia and New Zealand, that, people are going to be booking those planes up, because that's not the case, and there's no evidence for it.
Yeah. And so do you think that long-term planning, what does that support sort of look like from a marketing point of view or from a content perspective? Give me some examples of what that might be like.
So there's probably four things to keep in mind. The first is that the longer term that you're going to help people plan for and create content that kind of supports that longer term planning, the greater the chance that you're going to have to convert them to a higher yielding visit. And the reason for that is that you're going to be talking to them for a longer period of time. And if you start now, you're going to be sort of getting in there early. Without kind of selling them, without being promotional, but the chances are they're going to be sort of whittling away their destination kind of shortlist, if you like, or their experience shortlist. And you're going to be there early, you can be there often, and you can sort of build up to that. That would be number one.
Yep.
Number two is really about understanding how your audience has changed. And not just, like I said, from like a psychological behavioral point of view, but literally how your audience has changed, because your source markets will change. The places where you get your visitors from are going to change dramatically. Obviously, here in Australia, we're not going to Bhutan or Peru or Rwanda or Canada anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we going? We're going to other states. We're going maybe to New Zealand. And while a lot of local businesses and destination marketing and management organizations might not have considered those particular audience, like the local traveler, if you like, before, they're going to have to start doing that now. So you've got to make sure that your content is fit for that purpose.
Yeah.
The third thing is to begin to understand what the respective destination marketing organization is doing. What are their messages, right? And you want to be super in lockstep with them now more than ever. We saw this a lot in the very brief bushfire recovery period at the start of the year before the corona curtain came down. We saw that businesses and regions were really leveraging what the state tourism and the national tourism body, Tourism Australia, was doing here to promote to Australia and overseas.
Yeah.
And leveraging those messages are really important now more than ever. Why? Obviously, you've got less money, you can't go splashing around endless dollars in marketing, but also you need to be seen to have a consistent voice now more than ever. And if that means that sometimes you're sort of sacrificing some of your key messages for the broader ones about the destination, then so be it. But it's a slow kind of burn. And then finally, I would say, destination marketers, I guess in particular, are well known for just sort of selling optimistic, positive, sort of uplifting, happy, warm kind of content.
Yep.
You need to get in your skill set some way to communicate in a responsible, factual manner. And some of the DMOs have been doing this really well here in Australia. Overseas, perhaps less so. But there needs to be a degree of factual, responsible communications, and make that your baseline. Push that out everywhere. Think about how that can be the first thing that people see before anything else, so you manage their expectations. Is one of the greatest challenges for travel marketing is when you set an expectation up here, people get there and they experience the thing or the place and it's down here, and then you're never going to recover from that.
And so are we sort of back in a kind of dreaming phase of the sort of travel? Like, are we all back in the same phase? Obviously, I worked in tourism a long time ago, and we sort of talked about this idea as you go through dreaming, planning, booking, that sort of thing. I'm sure it's changed since then to a degree. But is it sort of like a mass reset that we're all back in dreaming? It's not just one group where we're all reading books about Italy and thinking about Italy, but we're just dreaming about it. But it's still important, right?
Just dreaming, 100%. It's still important, and in many cases, that consideration set's going to become even messier, because we're seeing a lot more content and we're not actually being able to act on it. And in some cases, some people might be really kind of leading into that. And so I would suggest that your point about sort of a mass reset is quite accurate. And I think more specifically, what we need to consider in this time is that when we're talking about a particular experience, so let's leave the destination to one side, because that's relatively easy to do at a dreaming phase. But if you have a specific product or a specific activity or experience that your business is marketing, a particular tour, a particular accommodation sort of option, whatever it might be, at that level there, at that sort of operator level, you need to be conscious that your content is not going to be sort of top of the heap, right?
Yeah.
Your traditional content that you've been doing is not going to be the first priority, first cat off the rank.
Yep.
People are going to be looking to that dreaming content. They are going to be looking, like you say, to sort of, kind of collecting thoughts, like almost like like doing their Pinterest board, something mega, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that if you do have a business that's in that operator space, you want to create content that leverages and really, really, I guess, works best in that dreaming phase. And that is not product heavy stuff. It's not like, close-ups of your product features. It's not sort of extensive descriptions of every single item that people are doing on your tour. It is that higher order stuff. And I encourage people to look at brands like APT, for example. And I encourage people to look at brands like Hawaiian Airlines and Inspired by Iceland for some really great inspiration about how to elevate that conversation from the very product level up to that sort of more emotive, higher order thinking.
And do you think, as part of this, if we're all going through a reset, we've all probably spent quite a bit of time on our content strategies over the last couple of years. Is it time for a new content strategy? Like, are you advising your clients, hey, what we did last year, throw it out, no good anymore, things have changed, what do we do about the plans that we had?
I think that when we look at, and, in chatting to sort of, colleagues and clients in the industry, one of the things that comes out a lot is the desire to reprioritize efforts, reprioritize activities, and that seems to me to be the sensible way to go. These kind of difficult, challenging watershed moments, they don't reward strategic pivots. They do reward small tactical pivots, things that can change and be adapted quickly and be evaluated quickly. But large strategic pivots, now's not the time to change your brand. Now's not the time to change the style of what you're creating. The formats, the overall kind of, mix of stuff. Now is not the time. And the reason for that is that people are expecting a certain something from you, perhaps already, or they're expecting something from this time in the world. And you should be delivering against that as opposed to obsessing over, your own strategy and how that should sort of appear. Yes, you can kind of effectively pause a strategy if you like, make some tweaks to it, update a few elements, upweight certain things, downweight certain things, but don't change your brand because the desire to travel still exists. It will always exist, like we've said, and your product certainly hasn't fundamentally changed, other than the fact that it may not be able to be used or seen or experienced. And when the time comes to come back, well, then you need to just start planning for that product on a product management level to be, obviously safe, socially distanced, and complying with any and all kind of public health regulations. But broadly speaking, your product will still remain the same, and the reason why people come to see you or experience you will remain the same. And so therefore, there's no real imperative to sort of throw out the strategy, throw out the rule book, and start again.
And do you think, are there sort of, obviously many operators, they're probably not going to have a lot of spare funds to spend on some of these tactical pivots that they have to do to stay relevant. I mean, obviously you've said one of them is sort of ladder up your marketing to the whatever the destination marketing organization. And I understand that many of those destination marketing organizations run campaigns that you can participate in. Are there any other sort of low-cost approaches, whether it be developing content or things that you've sort of seen out there at the moment that places are doing to keep relevant during this time?
Yeah, I think now's the time to really speak to your loyalty audience. A lot of travel brands will have some kind of membership kind of, program, or at the very least a robust email list for when people pay for their bookings. Focus on those customers that they are, especially with the higher tiers of those sort of loyalty programs. They want to hear from you. It's something that is of interest to them. And yes, you can pitch them offers, very targeted offers with a lot of flexibility and all the right things in there. But they, aside from those deals, what you can do is you can kind of effectively give them content to advocate on your behalf, things that they can share, things that they can talk about, things that they can recommend. for later, I think are going to be super valuable. I think, yeah, obviously, as we said, laddering up to your DMO's kind of, marketing campaign, destination marketing approach, if you like, is really valuable. But then also seeing what other businesses you can kind of partner with. And I think this is particularly beneficial for regional areas where obviously the pandemic, the health effects of the pandemic are sort of being felt less, but the economic impacts are still being felt equally as much. And so looking at how you can kind of create your own sort of cooperatives or your own sort of, partnerships. Let's say you're a country town, there might be a pub, there might be a restaurant, a bakery, a really great hotel or a farm stay and a winery. And how can you sort of come together to create a collective message in the absence of anything destination sort of marketing related, but something which is compelling to your audience. And then you can also kind of pull and share your loyalty kind of databases, your lists, if you like. That's another great place to start. And finally, I'd say make sure you are looking at content on social media that is being posted, that's still being posted around travel, because you'll get a good idea of what people are looking for, what they're pining after, what they're really missing, that you can begin to kind of feature in your content once things start to kind of, begin to turn the right side up.
And I mean, I'm sure, like many of us, we're sort of trying to predict what's going to come out of this pandemic, the sorts of like consumer behaviors and new products. Do you think that, is it time to sort of start, I'm taking this question from one of our social feeds, is it time to start sort of, polishing the crystal ball on what sort of new travel trends or new travel products will come out of this? I mean, do you sort of get a sense for, are we there yet? Do we know what to predict in terms of, are we going to see cruise ships with respirators and ventilators pre-installed, for example?
That might be not a terrible idea, to be fair.
Yeah, not a terrible idea. But yeah, like do you think social distancing is going to play into travel enough that we should start
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to impact, and the reason why is because travel relies on people going somewhere where they normally are not, interacting with people that they normally don't, often in close quarters in foreign situations. Mm-hmm. But it's way too early to predict anything. It's way too early to say this is how it's going to turn out. Aside, we joke about it, but aside from cruising seeming to have an uptick in 2021, it's far too early. And so the conversation right now is about plan for a range of things, plan for the best case, plan for the worst case, plan for everything in between, and make sure that I'm really going to disappoint this person who asked this question, but plan for a range of those things with equal weighting or validity, and don't bloody start on any one of those until things start to turn the right side up. The most basic thing that any kind of travel brand will need to do is reassess where they're getting their customers from. If you are a business in, say Tasmania, and you were getting a lot of your visitors from China, that's obviously not going to happen, for a long time. If you were getting visitors from the mainland, that may as well not happen for a long time. So have a look. That is the basic thing. And that is the one thing I can say with certainty. You've heard it here first. Your source markets will change dramatically. Whether it's the actual source markets, the volume you're getting from each one, or totally new markets kind of coming into the mix. And your content needs to reflect that change, because they're not going to need the same things. Like visitors, if your business is in Strahan in Tasmania, visitors from, Launceston are not going to need the same kind of content. They're not going to respond to the same kind of messages that visitors from Melbourne or Sydney or Shenzhen need. So make sure that you're sort of starting with that as the only prediction that I would be happy to make now.
And what tools are there? Tools out there that can assist with reassessing those new audience sources? How would you sort of go about that if you're a small operator? Because obviously a lot of small operators probably rely on the information passed through from their DMOs and that sort of thing. Should we be doing this ourselves?
I think we do need to look to our destination marketing organisations to a certain extent, because they will be doing research that will create foundations for these new campaigns in future and these new messages to these potentially very different audiences. So I think we need to start there. But also I think it never hurts to do, it's a very simple exercise that doesn't really cost you anything other than time, is sort of look back at a series of your bookings, not of your actual, not of your social media audience, people on your email list, people who actually booked and kind of punched a ticket. Whether it's like, I don't know, the last 20, the last 50, the last 100, the last 12 months or whatever, and have a look at where they're from. Have a look at their postcodes, have a look at their states. It's a very simple exercise. It's not a particularly sophisticated one, but it will at least give you an idea of how exposed you are to vulnerable markets or not. So, if you are that business in Strawn in Tasmania, and you look at all of your bookings and you see that 40% are from mainland China, and you see that another 30% are from mainland Australia, well, you can probably guess immediately that 70% of your business is probably going to go.
Yep.
And also 70% of your audience is not going to be able to really act on any content or offers or anything you send them. So, looking how you can expand that immediate market in your sort of immediate geographical vicinity,
yep,
is sort of a really basic way to start. As far as the other stuff, sort of predicting those bigger markets, there really probably aren't very many free tools or low-cost tools that do that.
Yep.
You definitely want to keep your eye on what your DMO is doing, and keep an eye on other sources and other resources online. But that exercise about sort of determining your exposure to more vulnerable source markets, I think, is very useful, because it will help inform or kind of prioritize what content you sort of put out the door first once things start to once the green shoots start to come through.
And very quickly before we go, I just want to sum up. From you, Andres, 3 things that we should do next week. This week, let's say this week, we were going. You could get started tomorrow, or you could get started as soon as this live feed's finished. All valuable information. But let's say this week you were sort of going, I'm not quite sure that I'm ready to get back to my customers this week. I really don't know what to say. What would be your 3 things come next week that I would do if I was working in travel?
Have a look, number one, at your content and see how much of it allows you to speak to travelers' needs to travel in the longer term, how visionary, how far out it looks. And if it only really looks, a season ahead or a few months ahead, then invest in sort of bulking that out. And now's obviously the time if you have the time. Number 2, I would say, have a look at what your DMO is doing. Call them, get on the phone. They've all got industry relations people, and speak to them about what's happening if you haven't already, and get to know the next steps from their point of view very, very quickly, so you can begin to plan to sort of, kind of hitch your wagon to them, because that in many ways will be your first opportunity to get a good sort of, take a good sort of swipe at the new world whenever it kind of resumes. And number 3 would be the last point that I made about assessing how exposed you are to those vulnerable markets and how much of your audience, your marketing audience, is in those vulnerable markets, so then you can tailor the content to them. Because it's not to say you can't stop putting out content on your Chinese WeChat channel, if you're that business in Strawn, but just be very, very clear that no offers, nothing immediate, and content that helps people plan further away. So for example, talk about an event that's happening in 2021 rather than something that's happening this winter. Talk about next winter. So those would be my 3 kind of main points. Audit your content, look for visionary content. Number 2, make sure you are 100% lockstep with what your DMO is doing. And number 3, make sure you understand how exposed you are to vulnerable markets in your marketing audience and also from your customers.
Great. Okay, that is all we have time for. Thank you very much, Andres, for sharing with us everything about travel. Guys, this live stream is recorded and available on YouTube at any stage. We'll shoot it out in our socials as we go. Thanks very much to the rest of the team who are behind the scenes telling me that my microphone was too loud. I really appreciate it. I need some technical advice every now and then. And thanks for doing the comments. If you've got any feedback on this session, we're going to be doing these every 2 weeks. Our next one is on podcasting. It's going to contain a bunch of tips for those emerging into that world. Stay tuned. The information will go out in the next 2 weeks. Thanks very much. See you.